If you want to wonder how is the environment, how are our food sources affecting society, just look at kids. That is the true test of the viability of food systems.
Chef James Barry, who, if I am right, will, after this interview, have a positive impact on your health as well. James has spent 20 years in the culinary industry, and he has notably been a private chef for many A-list celebrities, including Tom Cruise, George Clooney, Gerard Butler, Sean Puffy Combs, just to name a few. He has also co-authored recipes in multiple cookbooks, and one of them being the Naked Foods Cookbook. His current focus is to bring the ancestral principle of nose-to-tail eating to the masses. Many of us cringe at the thought of eating liver, spleen, heart. We cringe at really embracing the nose-to-tail mindset.
There's 9 million species in the world. Clearly, we have lost our way with our innate knowledge of what our body needs. Now, there's lots of reasons why, but I do believe one of the ways to get back to even a little bit of innate knowledge of what your body needs is to...
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Welcome to the next episode of the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity podcast. I think our next guest has already impacted what I eat. Let me be clear. This is the first conversation that I've had with Chef James, and I have yet to purchase his product. Actually, that's not true. When I wrote that, I hadn't purchased it. I purchased it. I just haven't received it yet. The fact that he has already impacted my nutrition is one of the interesting aspects of the biohacking and longevity community. Our next guest is Chef James Barry, who, if I am right, will, after this interview, have a positive impact on your health as well. James has spent 20 years in the culinary industry, and he has notably been a private chef for many A-list celebrities, including Tom Cruise, George Clooney, Gerard Butler, Sean Puffy Combs, just to name a few. He has also co-authored recipes in multiple cookbooks, and one of them being the Naked Foods Cookbook, which I just like the name anyway. His current focus is to bring the ancestral principle of nose-to-tail eating to the masses. Many of us cringe at the thought of eating liver, spleen, heart. We cringe at really embracing the nose-to-tail mindset. Hopefully today you will change your minds. James, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's truly a pleasure.
So, by the way that you have already impacted me is I interviewed Natalie Nadam for my longevity summit. And while preparing to interview her, I think I came across your interview with Natalie, and she's already enthusiastic about organ meats. And so I actually searched out some organ meat blends. So I think you have already pushed me in the direction that you're hoping to push a lot of other people to. So again, I'm excited about this conversation.
Excellent. Yeah, Natalie is fantastic and just doing such great work. Glad you guys got to talk.
She's amazing. She actually helped me. I think it was 9 people on my longevity summit were introductions from her. I just owe her so much. She's so amazing. Now, you have a very interesting path to founding Pluck. Studying drama in college and then studying to be a chef around 2003. I want to get a little bit of background here. What drove you to study drama? And then why did you transition to culinary arts? And do you see any parallels between drama and culinary arts?
Gosh, it's such a great question. The journey really is that I loved cooking from early on. I think I was around 7 years old. I was taught to scramble an egg and immediately was a fan. But the joke in my household is that we knew dinner was ready because the smoke detector went off. So I loved cooking, yet I did not grow up in a foodie environment. To this day, my mom is just in awe that I became a chef. But I think as I've gotten older, I've really been able to identify that we are products of contrast. And I find that it's contrast that really inspires us to change, really, ultimately. And so I embraced cooking from a young age, but I did not see it as a career path. I thought, well, chefs have to work it. I mean, back in the day, we did not have celebrity chef culture. We had 2 people on TV. It was like Julia Childs and the Frugal Gourmet, and they were both on PBS. So there was just no concept of what was possible except you have to own a restaurant. And my dad used to work nights because he owned a grocery store, and I didn't like it. I didn't like going to bed without my dad there, and I didn't like waking up with him gone as well. So I just didn't want that lifestyle. And so I convinced myself, okay, well, I won't be a chef. I'll just do it as a hobby. And it wasn't until later, I didn't even know I wanted to be an actor or be in the dramatic arts. That was something I learned late in high school, and then I discovered in college. I grew up kind of very practically. Like, I wanted to be a doctor when I was younger because my grandfather was a doctor. So I thought that was my path, but I wasn't very great in science. You know, I didn't have that mind. I had a lot of emotional intelligence, but I didn't necessarily have a lot of scholastic intelligence. And so I immediately kind of realized, well, I'm not going to probably become a doctor, but I was still so interested in human nature. And when I was in college, I studied psychology, while I also studied drama. And then I pursued acting and was doing fine. I mean, I was making money, but I still had to have that kind of bill-paying job, and I was a substitute teacher. But it was 9/11 when that happened that I really kind of woke up realizing, wait, life is too short to be messing around. And I realized that I needed to only follow that which had heart, that I truly felt passionate about. And I did love the process of creating. I love taking an idea and materializing it. And that's what drama or theatrics was to me. But I didn't love the teaching that I was doing to get the bills paid. And something I also noticed is that as I was pursuing acting, a lot of actors, like, that's their end goals. Like, I just want to be an actor and I want to make money at it and I want to survive. Mine was always like, I want to act. I want to make enough money so I can then take that money and go do, A, B, C, D, do 3 other things that had nothing to do with acting. And that was the big wake up call. It's like, why am I waiting? Why am I waiting to do these things? And what ultimately my kind of mission was, even at that time, was like, I want to do stuff that contributes to society. And yes, entertaining people does contribute to society, and it's very important to have comedians, entertainers, drama, people that are kind of expressing the emotions that we all share inside, but maybe sometimes don't know how to express. I think that is important. But after 9/11, I was like, it's not as important to me anymore. And that's when I reevaluated, and I reminded myself that I loved cooking, and I started looking into the culinary path. And I found a school in New York that was serving healthy ways of eating. It was kind of fusing nutrition and food, because you would think that's an obvious fusion. Like, food is supposed to be nutritious, but as we all know, we live in a calorie rich society, obese society, but yet we're
gluttonous.
Gluttonous society, and yet we're nutrient deficient. So clearly there's a disconnect between what we eat and what's nutritious for us. So this school was really working towards fusing that, like thinking about how you prepare food and how do you make it as nutritionally viable as possible from what you're doing. And that was like, oh, I'm into that. Like, that really taps some passion in me. And it was also a school that was very well known for private chefing, which is also what was of interest to me. I did not want to work in a restaurant. And, that then led me down the path I eventually followed.
Man, that's a great story. I have the same impression. My wife used to own a restaurant before we got together, and we just talk about, like, that just sounds such a brutal, like I have so much respect, and in Houston, I think we eat out more than most cities, certainly in the country, I don't know if in the world, and so we're always at a different restaurant and have so much appreciation for, what the owner is doing, what the chef is doing, but it's not a lifestyle that we would choose, and you kind of had that framework, because, like, that's not the lifestyle that I want. And you found a way to, with the original journey thought of becoming a doctor, through food, you're helping people be healthy, right? So you really accomplished it. You just accomplished it with the skill sets that you have. That's pretty cool. I have to ask, so when you started there, that was right at 9/11. I don't remember when they flipped the food pyramid upside down. So do you remember when that was? And did you start with the pyramid right side up and then end up upside down? Or were they already ahead of where everybody else was at the time when you started cooking at that school, at that culinary school?
This school, I don't know if they consciously turned it upside down, but there was definitely an emphasis on healthy fats. There was definitely an emphasis on humanely treated animals. Now, the program was actually primarily vegan vegetarian. That's what was kind of interesting. So I was trained to be really good at vegan vegetarian food, even though they did have a meat and fish section. So we did learn a complete, array of culinary arts, but this school is very well known for vegan vegetarian food. Now, even though I was not vegan and vegetarian at the time, I saw that as an advantage because I knew most people were interested in that diet at the time. And so I was like, oh, well, this will be an advantage. And I was just kind of looking for what's going to help me get into this field and not just be like everyone else. Like, what's going to help me not only excel, but also stand out.
Excellent. My next question is you ended up working with some A-list celebrities. Culinary school in New York. Were you working with the A-list celebrities in California, or was it in New York?
No, I was only in New York for the school. And what's so interesting is I had to pay for that school myself. I was in my 30s when I went. So there were a lot of people that were out of high school, and they were like, oh, I'm in New York, I'm going to party. And like, I was not that. I was there to learn that this was going to be my career. I did not have a lot of money at the time, and I had to, pay a lot to go there. I was determined. I was just, I'm going to milk this experience for as much as I can get from it. And so every opportunity I had, I took. So they used to do green markets, which is basically the farmer's market. They would have a stand and they would be doing cooking demos. I did all of those. I staged, which basically means I just gave my time for free at a restaurant and peeled potatoes or whatever it was for hours. I did that. I did literally as much as I could to soak in the knowledge. And I didn't calculatedly do this, but what it worked to my advantage was that I was the only person to get perfect attendance, first of all. Secondly, every time that school got a call from someone in LA for a chef or for anyone in the culinary arts, they referred me because they knew I was dependable. And I didn't connect those dots, but I'm like, oh man, I mean, that school, I think my first 2 years, from Tom Cruise to my first client was a CBS reporter, a well-known local CBS reporter. I got her through the school. I got Tom Cruise through the school. Basically celebrities, whoever was managing their household or their lives, would call the school looking for chefs because they knew it was a resource. So that school was an amazing investment.
So talking about that, I saw a number of your interviews, and I know that you've actually said no as you've been approached to be a private chef for a couple of people. One of them, they were describing like, this is how we want to eat, and it actually kind of maybe has direct parallels to the food pyramid, and now it's upside down question. Talk about that story where you were like, no, I won't take that job because I'm not going to cook that way.
Yeah, it was very bold of me. Here I had no money. I had no prospect of work. And yet the first call I got it was that reporter, the CBS reporter, her assistant called and said, hey, we're looking for, a counting calorie chef, someone who's going to go low fat, calorie specific, and prepare her meals. And I just, here I am in my 30s, and I knew why I was in the field. Like, I didn't get into the field just to placate what people believe is healthy, what I later called the illusion of health, and I think we're still very much in that state constantly. this idea of what we think is healthy versus what actually works, like what actually moves your health needle. And I was very clear like that, counting calories, the way at least it was done back in the day. Like, and I just want to highlight how it was done back in the day in case people forget. It's like you had something like Weight Watchers, and they would say, they would say, well, you got to count calories, but they would distinguish the calorie between an apple and a cookie, even though they're similar calorie count. They would just say, oh, well, it doesn't matter, either one, but as long as you keep the calories down. And that to me was a huge issue. Like, we have to look at what is the actual quality of the calories we are eating. And that was not part of the discussion back in the day. And then there was just all these trends. I think when I first got out of culinary school, it was the fat flush diet. That was the big book at the time. And we think of celebrities and people with money as like, oh, they must be in the know. They're so ahead of us. They're the biohackers, whatever. And they really aren't. At least most of them are not. Most of them are just people with a lot of money who are inundated with what is the hottest trend, what is the hottest book. Oh, and then they talk amongst themselves. Oh, I'm doing this. Oh, you're doing the master cleanse. Cool. I'm going to try that. And you lost how much weight? But no one's actually, they don't necessarily know. They're not doing it because they know the science. They're just following what other people do. Sometimes they've hired people who are either doctors themselves or nutritionists or chefs, and they're bringing in their perspective, but no one actually has the answer, right? So in my penniless but solid grounding state, I told them no. I said I can't do that. I don't believe that's healthy, and so I don't want to be that type of chef. And she said, well, what do you do? Like, what do you think is healthy? And I said, well, I believe that everything should be made from scratch. I don't think I should be giving you anything that I have not controlled the ingredients from. And I said that it should be primarily animal based, and it should be, at the time, I definitely was a proponent of lots of vegetables. And I would say I still believe that, but I just am more clear that it's not for everyone. But, and then I was also low carb. I believed in you didn't need all the pastas and starches and whatnot. So I was advocating that. So very homemade, including dressings and sauces, everything from scratch, low sugar, low carb. And once I explained it, they said, okay, we'll do what you said. And, she completely lost weight. She achieved all her health goals, and I was her chef for 2 years. It was fantastic.
That's pretty. So you're really kind of describing, I think, the phrase farm to table, right? Like that's really kind of the kind of chef that you wanted to be, where you had control of all of the ingredients, and maybe that phrase didn't even exist at that time.
I think it was just starting like about 5 years later, but there's so much that I did back in the day, Chris, that is now popular. And I'm still kind of blown away. Like, I'm seeing influencers on socials, and they're doing such rudimentary stuff like, oh, here's how to use spaghetti squash, instead of pasta. And I'm like, what? Like, I was doing that 20 years ago. Like, that's in vogue now. Like, I thought it was in vogue 20 years ago. Like, so I'm kind of baffled that the things that I was doing back then are now sort of in vogue, but yet I was doing them for so long that I'm kind of over them. You know what I mean? Like, I've moved on to a degree, yeah, and yet now,
that. Yeah.
I know.
But I've been using it for 20 years.
Yeah.
It sounds like you said that the celebrities aren't necessarily in the know. They do just try the trends sooner, but it's the same trend you're going to try in 4 months. They just have the budget and the staff to like, hey, that book just came out. I want to do that, and so they're able to do it a little bit faster and with a little bit less of their effort. There was one particular story that you shared while working with Tom Cruise and getting introduced to people that you knew. I was hoping you could share that with the audience, and then I want to get into organ meats and convince people that organ meats are good for them.
Yeah, working with Tom, it's funny that the first question I used to get, I don't get asked this as much anymore, but I used to get asked all the time, like, so how tall is Tom? How tall is he really?
Maybe everyone just knows he's short.
Yeah, I think it's just known now. But I always tell them, I'm like, when you're standing in front of Tom Cruise and he's enthusiastically talking to you as a peer, the last thing you're thinking about is how tall is he? You're looking at him going like, holy shit, I'm talking to Tom Cruise. I'm literally, you're looking in his eyes going like, that's Tom Cruise.
Is he going to jump out this window as soon as our conversation is over? I feel like that's what's going to happen.
I mean, it's really it's very surreal, particularly someone like him, because we've all grown. I mean, I don't think there's a single person. I don't think you could go anywhere on this planet where someone doesn't know who he is, and B, we've all grown up with his movies.
Yeah.
And so it was truly, I'd just been out of culinary school for about a year. I was cooking for him when he was doing the Valkyrie. That was the time period that I was his chef. I was his chef for about 2 years. And I had been cooking for him for about a month. And I was cooking, but we had never met. So I was preparing meals for his lunch meetings at Universal or United Artists. And so I guess those went so well that then he requested, hey, can he come with us to Germany when we do pre-production? So I got that call, and it's funny, my mom had to convince me to do it, which, looking back, I'm like, well, duh, I should have done it. But I had I had other clients. And so I was I felt very responsible to them. And I was like, how am I going to go to Germany for, I think it was a 10-day trip. How was it? I was going to go to Germany for 10 days. All those clients would be without food. So by the way,
I just have to interject at this point. It's very clear that you probably weren't taking vacations at this time. If the thought of going to work with Tom Cruise for 10 days that's work, you weren't taking vacation, and a lot of us have gone through periods where we did not take any vacations. This was one of those periods for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was, for many years, I didn't go on any vacations, but I fortunately was mirrored to take it, and I did. And so I went there, and while I was there, I was there was this one production meeting where they were reading through the scripts and working with it, and it was going to be the director, the writers, the producers, the executive producers, Tom, and so they were all upstairs on this main floor, and I was to provide food for them all day. I mean, it was a very, very long day, and I think it was kind of like dinner time, or it was just after dinner time. So it had been most of the day. And I went up to check the food just to make sure that they were okay. And he walked out of this secondary room, and he said, hey, are you the chef who's been making all the food, And I said, I am. And he said, he introduced himself, and he just enthusiastically was sharing to me how much he loved the food. And mind you, we've kind of covered this, but just to reiterate, so I was someone who had pursued acting. So not only did I have a respect for Tom Cruise as just what he's accomplished, but I had a respect for all those people that were behind the scenes, the directors, the writers. I knew who all these people were because I had researched them and I had studied them as part of my career. Plus, I was only a year out of culinary school. So I was also I think anytime we approach something new, there's this kind of imposter syndrome. There's this aspect of it of oh, I don't know what I'm doing. So and then I was about a year out of school at this point. And so, and I definitely still had that. I definitely was oh, it's such an uphill battle. So to have Tom Cruise not only praising me for what I did, but what he did is he walked me into the other room. He opened the doors, and there in that room was Bryan Singer, Chris McQuarrie, the executive producer that Tom used to produce with. I'm forgetting her name now. I think her name was Deborah something, but she's very well known. And then a bunch of other big wigs in the industry, and they all stood up and they clapped for me. And I got really emotional, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was really one of those moments of I've arrived as a chef, but also I'm in the room with these power players, and they not only respect me, but they're honoring me for what I am, how I am contributing. And Yeah, it was a real moment of like, okay, I've arrived. Like, I think I know what I'm doing well enough to get praised by these people that I respect. And, from there, it kind of just took off. Like, I really, I gained a confidence about what I was doing. I even left working. I mean, I had a very good job with Tom. Now, it wasn't easy. It was a very hard job because he's not necessarily demanding, but his lifestyle is very demanding. And so I think even when I worked for him for 2 years, I think myself, one of the assistants of Katie's and this one other person, the kind of butler or the guy who managed the household, I think we were the three people that were there. In 2 years, we were the only three that still had a job 2 years later. Like, people would come in and out because it was a lifestyle. It was really hard. People couldn't hack it. And yet we were the three that were left standing. And, yeah, I left that job. I left it to start a meal delivery company because I continued to have this very strong instinct and very clear drive of that I was here on this planet to support more than just the 1%. Like, that I wanted to bring this sense of food, health, and just availability, perspective of food and health to the masses. And so I left him to start a meal delivery service. That was, I think on a certain level, I talk about this a lot, which is, it bugs me that you tend to have to be wealthy to be healthy. I think we don't talk about that enough, that so many of the health paradigms that we talk about are expensive. And it bothers me so much because I don't think real food, at least when I'm talking about real food, that it should be like that, but yet it is. And hopefully we can dive into that a little deeper later on as we talk. But I think that I was trying to make things more available with the meal delivery, but even in that process, it still was an expensive service because when you make food from scratch, like, there's the real cost of food versus the subsidized, ultra processed foods that we're presented with. And, a hamburger does not cost 69 cents, which is what it used to cost. Right now, I think it's $1.49 and still doesn't cost that. Like, that's still an inaccurate price for what a real hamburger should cost. So yeah, we're living in this illusion of what we think food should cost, but it's just not accurate.
So just like your career, right? You had this period of time where you were focused on one person. So far, we've been focused on you, and it's because it's a fascinating story. I do want to shift to organ meats, and I really want to shift to kind of what your current vision is. Before that, there's just an interesting thing that I don't know if you've thought of. You studied drama, probably hoping to have that exact same audience in that conference room applaud you. And then you actually got applauded for your culinary skills. So you still got the applause, right? But it was for a different skill set than when you were studying drama. So that's kind of cool. You don't always know. Like if you think about the process of having a vision and making it happen, the secret, right? You like maybe at one point you had a vision of those people applauding you. You just didn't know how it was going to happen.
It's so true. I tend to think of it like you can put out your wants, your desires, but we just don't know how fast they'll come nor how they'll show up. We can't control those parts, but we can control what we want, right? We can control what we put out into the world, but we just don't know. We cannot control how it's going to be received. But yeah, the drama, to answer that question from earlier, the drama is kind of come in. It plays more towards marketing now, and presence. Like, I can get up on any stage and I'm very comfortable. I can talk in front of, hundreds to thousands of people, and I don't have shyness, about being silly or being wrong. Like, I don't have as much ego wrapped into it, as I think someone who doesn't have that training would. So that's been a really amazing use of my experience. Yeah, it's interesting because I at this point I've been on stages doing cooking demos. I've done talks. One when our book came out, I had to do tons of stuff around that. I've been a vendor at events. I mean, I've done tons of podcasts, and it's just, there's an ease to me about like, I can just show up as who I am, and I may get judged for it, but it's like, I'm not as attached to the outcome. I just want to get this message out and get people thinking about these things. And if someone leaves our conversation at least asking questions that they weren't before, then I feel like I did my job.
I have a parallel. I was not drama in high school, not drama in college, studied engineering. But I did do, I was a professional comedy improv artist for about 5 years in a small theater here. And so, yeah, it does give you this kind of very cool skill set. But all right, let's get focused. Pluck, the company you started, is focused on organ meat. Let's talk about them first. When I think about organ meat, I often think about like eating wild game has, we say, a gamey flavor. Do all organ meats have that? Or is it the case that if you're eating organ meat from, I don't know, we'll say a traditionally American fed cow, it's going to be less gamey? What does that look like? And do you have a preference if you're kind of selecting organ meats?
Yeah, so let's first identify what is an organ meat, because a lot of people, when you say organ meat, they just think liver, heart, kidneys. You know, that's really where they go. But truthfully, organ meats are offal, OFFAL, which is a perfect name, right? Since most people think they taste awful. But offal it really encompasses everything in that animal except the muscle and the bone. So that tongue, for example, that is considered organ meat, even though it's not a traditional organ the way we would think. Skin is technically an organ meat, right? It's our largest organ. So when you think of it from that perspective, it really opens the door. And if you really dig into it, it's like, oh, wow, there is so much of that animal we are not eating when you think of it beyond just liver. And I always find it interesting that people just they lob on to, like, right now, the trend we're seeing is ribeye and liver. Those are the two things that people have lobbed onto and are like, okay, this is what I'm going to get in my diet. And I'm just like, well, okay, hold on. So if we pretend we are, back in the day, a tribe, and we've fasted for days so that we could heighten our abilities to go and kill this animal. What's the first thing we're going to probably do once we've killed that animal? Well, we're going to probably eat the part of the animal that's going to give us, think of it like the electrolyte of the animal, like the thing that's going to give us the like punch of nutrients right away that we're going to fastly be able to restore our reserves and give us a nutrient boost that we need to then carry that animal out, right? So what happens is most people, they'll eat the liver or the heart or one of the organs raw right then and there, right? So that right there is an interesting piece because it tells you why would they do that?
Yeah.
Right? Why didn't they take part of the meat and eat it sashimi style? You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
Like why did they not do that? Why did they eat the liver or the heart or one of those organs? Well, I think that answer, tells us a lot right away about, that's not only is it nutrient dense, but it's incredibly bioavailable and it's easy for our bodies to assimilate. And if it's a healthy animal, you can eat it raw as well. Well, then they trek it back to their hearth or their camp. And let's just say there's 23 people. Like, there's one heart, there's one liver, there's one spleen, 2 little kidneys. You know what I mean? It's like there's not much of everything. So if you're just hoping to only eat liver, you're going to be kind of shit out of luck. Like, it's probably going to go to the pregnant people. It's going to go to the people that are elderly or need it the most. And you might get it somewhere else. And so what I really am trying to more and more steer people away is don't focus on one thing. Just focus on a whole animal. Let's try to get the whole animal into our diet because we're already slaughtering that animal. And we're only using about 50% of that animal. When you take the bone and the muscle, it's really just about 50%. That means we're then sending the other 50%. It's basically not for human consumption for the most part, which means that we're not able to use it. So it is getting used. It's just getting used in other industry. It might go into animal feed. It might go to pet food, zoo animals. It goes other places, just not to us. And then what do? well, we are still nutrient deficient. And then we turn around and we spend our money in a multi-billion-dollar supplement industry. And so to me, it's like we could talk about saving the planet and all this kind of environmental talk. But to me, the most environmental thing we can do is actually just eat whole animal. Think about how efficient that would be in terms of the system that's already in place.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS 60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
Yeah, so excellent understanding of kind of organ meats and yeah, I've kind of used that example as I'm sharing with people. I use I think it's a Force of Nature, and they have ancestral blends of bison and cow, and so I've switched over to those because of that kind of preparation. Well, because of you in preparation for the Natalie Nadam interview. Are they gamey? Like, and is the gamey kind of parallel with if they're wild, the organs are even more gamey, and if they're not wild, they're not that gamey? What does that look like?
Thank you for bringing back the question. Yeah. I definitely got lost there. So it does depend on the species and also the organ. So every organ does taste different. We clump them all together, and then we tend to think all species taste the same as well. But I mean, the joke is, like, you could eat rattlesnake, you could eat rabbit, you could eat squirrel even, and people say, what does it taste like? And people say, oh, it tastes like chicken, right? That's the age-old joke. But they really all do have a slightly different taste. But what we forget, though, is, well, what affects this taste? I recently was at an event, and I did a cooking demo, and I showed people 3 ways to eat liver, and it was really important to me that everyone try each stage. So the first stage was I had some frozen little bits of liver. They were the size of like a pill that people could just chew or swallow. Okay, that was one. Then I properly cooked the liver, meaning that I did not overcook it. A lot of people overcook it, and I lightly cooked it, and then I let people taste that, and then I made a pate with it. And in the 3 ways, people saw the difference, because when you overcook liver, it actually gets more irony, like more metallic, and it gets more chalky. And that's it's the texture and that kind of taste that we project onto every other organ out there. And it's just not, it's not actually the case. If you were to eat raw liver, it's actually very subtle iron taste. It's not as metallic as when you overcook it. And the same goes, like, heart is very close to a muscle meat, and it does have more flavor than muscle, but it's a similar texture. And so I think a lot of times we, as humans, we forget the importance of all of it. So flavor is important, but so is texture. And we judge a lot of what we eat by texture, and we gravitate towards comfort foods based on texture as well. I mean, like, for example, what's the food that you gravitate towards when you're having a hard day? Is it a creamy texture? Is it a crispy, salty texture?
I haven't had them in a long time. It's hot dogs.
Okay. So sort
like
of a
bread
savory.
And ketchup and mustard. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I love asking that questions. When I used to private chef, that was always my first question to people, is like, what is that food that you grew up on or that you gravitate towards when you have a hard day? Because that says everything about not only someone's history, but also the textures of what really soothe them and kind of help them, kind of emotionally ground down. And so what I tend to do as a private chef is I would then try to bring those textures and those flavors into the healthy food. So then that way you didn't feel like you had to eat a hot dog every now and then just to get that sensation. Not that a hot dog is necessarily bad for you, but you know what I mean? I
think because you studied a little psychology, I don't think I really want to know what my preference for hot dogs says about me emotionally. So at what point, I'm assuming you started incorporating, and maybe very early on, organ meats into your cooking, right? And because you started Pluck, it's an organ meat, and we're going to get into that. But when did you start incorporating organ meats, and did you have to tweak recipes for certain people, or you were already that was just part of your job?
So I learned about organ meats in culinary school. I did not grow up eating organ meats. I mean, we did have a little bit of the giblets from the whole chicken when we cook a whole chicken, but even then they were overcooked and I didn't really favor them. So I did not grow up eating organ meats at all. It wasn't something I had a taste for. I went to culinary school and I learned about Weston A. Price, and I learned about these traditional foods and how to prepare them. And I understood it on a very deep level. I'm like, oh, this is probably necessary. This is important. But it wasn't until I actually had kids, and this was after I had cooked for those celebrities, and I had been a private chef. I mean, I still every now and then private chef, but it was way after that. And it was more because I was looking at my kids, and I'm very aware that kids are the canaries in the coal mine. So if you want to wonder how is the environment, how are our food sources affecting society, just look at kids. That is the true test of the viability of food systems. And I was very aware, I'm like, okay, well, if I were to do a search on what is the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, organ meats tend to be at the top 3, if not the top. And when they're compared to the things that we think are nutrient dense, like beef or salmon, or some people think kale, blueberries, those things, nothing compares to organs. Like those other items might check off some of the boxes, but organs check off every nutritional box. And usually they have, much higher numbers, But just to even cover a little bit of what they do carry, since it's part of this discussion, is like, so they do have, of course, protein. They have some, they are a source of quality protein. Now, I do want to stress that's not what I would recommend Pluck is for, because Pluck is a seasoning. So we're really focusing on micronutrients there, not necessarily protein. But they basically have the abundance of, vitamins and minerals. Like they have vitamin A. Liver is very high in that, but so is spleen. It's actually 5 times higher than liver. You have B, all the B vitamins, which a lot of people are really nutrient deficient in, surprisingly. You have even C. Vitamin C is sometimes found. It's not necessarily as much in the liver, but it's in some of the other organs. And then you have D, E, and K in the form of K2. Which was also previously known as activator X. I'm sure people might remember that, because it had the ability to activate bone development. That's what they called it, activator X. But I look at the heme iron in organ meats. I look at the ability to help retain muscle mass, which of course muscle does that as well. It's a great source of choline. It's rich in peptides. It's rich in fat-soluble vitamins, the ones I already mentioned, which is really important as well, because I love this when I look at food, wouldn't it be better, like a lot of times we're recommended supplements, and it might be like a fat-soluble vitamin, and we're told, oh, you should be eating this with food. They don't actually say, well, that's because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. They just say, you should be eating this with food, and they expect people to understand why. And so some people sometimes don't, and then they feel nauseous. Like, why am I so nauseous after taking this? Well, it's because you didn't eat it with food, right? But I love the fact that with organ meats, it is a food. So it's like, it's already in the perfect proportions that you would want, because it's as Mother Nature kind of intended, right? So we kind of talk about organ meats as Mother Nature's multivitamin. And so I love that it's efficient. I love that it's easy to a degree. I mean, depending on your background, but I think they can be easy, and I think Pluck makes it even easier. And that they're the best source of your, they're a great use of your money, because you can take the same 100% grass-fed cow where the ribeye is $25 a pound, and that same cow has a heart it has a liver, it has a tongue, it has other parts to it that are not $24 a pound. They are $6, $7, $8 a pound. I mean, they're so much cheaper. So you can actually lower your grocery bill by eating more parts of the animal than just like the ribeyes or those very expensive cuts. So I love it for that. Absolutely. But to finish the question though, is it was really the kids that inspired me to look back into this stuff. And then it became, well, how do I actually get these organ meats in them? Because the reality is I could make pâtés till I'm blue in the face, but that doesn't mean anyone's going to eat them.
But interesting, the pricing you just mentioned does not lead to $1.50 hamburger, right? Like you're just talking like on a per pound basis, even with organ meats, you're not getting there. That's kind of telling, really. So I think you see Pluck as a gateway drug of sorts to steer people in the direction of consuming more organ meats. Is that correct? Talk a little bit more about the development of Pluck and how you see it positively impacting people's journey towards organ meats.
Yeah, if organ meats are the gateway to nutritional abundance, which is I think what I'm basically saying when I'm talking about their properties, then Pluck is the gateway to eating organs, because we naturally have a few hurdles. So we have that associated taste that we've been talking about that I find fascinating, because I can go up to most people and say, hey, do you want to try these organs? And they'll go, oh no. And I'm like, but have you actually ever tried them? And they're like, no, I don't want to. And I'm like, okay, but if I were to bring up a dessert that you've never tried, you wouldn't be making that face. Right? So clearly it's a mindset and psychology that it doesn't have anything to do with it. You haven't tried it. It's your association. So we have that hurdle. Then we also have the hurdle of, well, how do you cook it? You cannot cook it the same way. Just like you can't cook grass-fed beef the same way you would cook corn-fed beef. They cook differently. You actually if you cook them the same way, you will overcook the grass-fed beef. It needs to be less cooked because it doesn't have as much fat. It's leaner meat, so that it basically will get really hard if you cook it the same way. The same thing with organs. You can't cook them the same way as you would muscle, because they're not muscle. So that cooking knowledge is really important. And then 3 is sourcing. A lot of people just don't know where to source it. They don't know how to source it. I mean, we do, most people listening to this podcast probably have access, but the reality is if we focus on America, most Americans live in food deserts. They don't have access to anything but, ultra processed foods. So that access is a huge hurdle as well. So I was really setting out to solve that. And luckily, Pluck ended up being even more than that. And when I created it, I didn't know that it was going to cover so many things. But basically, what Pluck became for me is a way to get those organ meats into people's diets effortlessly. Because as a father, I do not want to spend time making food and then have someone sit at the table, a 12 or 8-year-old, and say, I don't want to eat this. And I'm not going to make a second meal or a third meal. And I know a lot of parents do that. And I'm always teaching them to not do that, because that is how you create not only a jerk, but like a picky eater. You know what I mean? You're basically co-creating someone who's not going to be able to have grit and accept their circumstances. They think that everyone's going to bow down to them and change and accommodate them versus them accommodating for the circumstances. And so that was really important to me. And 2, I said this already. I just wanted it to be easy. I wanted it to be simple. I didn't want to have to contribute to what I believe most parents are already experiencing, which is a hard day. Like, we already have hard lives to a degree. I mean, parenting is not easy. And so I wanted to simplify it.
Yeah. So you've got Pluck, right? So you create Pluck. Did you have this vision that this was just a way to get some organ meat in them? Or I believe that, I insist my kids, we call it a no thank you bite. They're 14 now. And even now, if I'm like, you need to take a no thank you bite, they will at least take a bite. So I think you can get kids to eat something and eventually their own physiology will be like, wait a minute, that broccoli is actually good for me. And now I like it, or I don't hate it. Right. And so I'm able to eat it. Was that kind of the mindset, hoping that Pluck will be this gateway drug into full on organ meats?
Absolutely. It is proven that if you put someone in jail, and let's just say they're there for 5 years eating the same food. So they'll go in and think the food is disgusting. And then once they're out, they'll actually miss it. They'll miss the food. So if you give someone this, if you basically, you eat the same foods all the time, you will eventually start to like them. That's just the way the human body works to a degree. It's like its job is to survive. So, based on, and there is a psychology built into it, but I think our bodies take care of us in that sense of like, you'll eventually have a taste for it. You just have to do it as often as you can. So Pluck is, yes, it is a gateway. Now, if you're someone who's like, I just want to get because it's really microdosing, right? We're putting seasoning on food. We're microdosing frequently, which is cumulative effect. Now, a lot of people will say, well, but is that really enough? And my kind of point to them is like, look, the body is not always about all or nothing. Like, if anything, when you give the body too much of something, it just evacuates it. Because, like if we get too much protein, we pee as much as we can out, right? Like the body is always looking for homeostasis or balance. So in my judgment, it's the small movements, it's the things that we do daily that will move our health needle the most. If there's something, and it doesn't matter what it is, but if there's something, let's say your intimacy is an issue and you're working on intimacy, well, if you hug someone once a month, is that really moving your intimacy needle? Probably not. But if you have small touches and intimate interactions a little bit each day during that month, now you're moving your health needle or your intimacy needle. So I really gravitate towards small movements that can become daily habits.
Do you have a goal for you or your kids or even the audience of organ meats and how much should you be eating and what might be a sweet spot? We won't call ideal because everybody's different, but like what might be a sweet spot as we're thinking about. Well, here's an example. I'm eating I'm eating a pretty high protein diet. I'm eating about a pound of ground beef. I think it's a 5% blend. It's ancestral blend from the Force of Nature. And
I think that's 10%. They do 10%.
10.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, heart and liver, those two specifically. Yep. But what range do you think is good for people? What does that look like in your opinion?
Well, that's the thing. I don't know if the range has actually been established. The industry will say 2 ounces of organ meat a day, which is equivalent to 1 teaspoon of freeze-dried and powdered organ meat. So like we have a product called Pure.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a product called Pure that is just organ meat. And that is, I always tell people, if you want to get 2 ounces a day, just use a teaspoon, throw it in your smoothie and you're done. You know what I mean? It's that simple. Now, is that accurate though? I don't know. I think a lot of what we're told we should be doing is not always it's just with the information we have right now. Obviously, if someone is already already has an abundance of vitamin A, then they need to be careful. If they already have an abundance of iron, they need to be careful. But here's what I love is that when we're eating the organ meats versus swallowing them in capsule, we have the benefit that our body will tell us what it needs and wants. And if anything, there's a great quote by Bill Schindler. He's a professor of archaeology. He says, "We are the only species in the world that looks to someone else to tell us what to eat." There's 9 million species in the world. So clearly we have lost our way with our innate knowledge of what our body needs. Now, there's lots of reasons why. It all makes sense when you think about the trajectory of modern, human culture and the way that we're marketed to and whatnot, right? But I do believe one of the ways to get back to even a little bit of innate knowledge of what your body needs is to actually eat the food. And you completely bypass it when you take a supplement or swallow a pill. because if you think about it, our bodies have been biologically designed to give feedback, to communicate within itself by through our senses, whether it's through our eyes, our touch, our sense of taste, our hearing. All these senses have been designed to give us information and support us in getting the things that are not going to kill us, basically, right? They're going to support us in any circumstance to maintain our longevity and our survival. Most of us are bypassing that. And I think we're now feeling the detriments of that, because when you swallow, if I put salt on your tongue, your body tells you when to stop. I don't have to tell you when to stop. Your body will not let you do too much salt if you're eating it. It will literally, the salt will start to taste weird. Your mouth, the chemistry in your mouth will start to get off. Like you literally it will make you sick. Well, if I give you a salt tablet, it's a delayed response. You don't get any response when you first swallow that tablet. You only feel the bloat or the issue 20 or 30 minutes later, if that, right? It's the same thing with organ meats. If you're eating the organ meat, your body will tell you, the organ meat itself will start to taste different. Like at first it might have a pleasing, even if you don't like the taste, it might still feel pleasing to your body, almost the way like bone broth is very like warming and calming to the body, right? There's a physical response when we drink bone broth. The same thing happens when you eat organ meats. If your body, though, doesn't need the iron, doesn't need something the organ meat's providing, the organ will taste different. It will literally, you'll have trouble taking another bite, just the same way that when a woman gets pregnant, wine or alcohol starts to taste different the longer they're pregnant. We're to the point where they can't even drink the wine because it tastes bitter or it doesn't taste right, right? That is our body protecting itself.
Well, and it's the same as getting the kids to eat the broccoli small pieces over and over again, because eventually the physiology will go like, "Hey, this is good," and it'll taste better. The reverse of that. That's awesome. All right, so you mentioned Pure. Kind of go through the products that you have and kind of any like how they were formed and why they were formed and Pure, you said it's like throw a teaspoon in your smoothie or whatever the right dosage. Are they all have about the same amount of organ meats, or what does that look like as well?
Yeah, they're definitely different. So we started with an all-purpose seasoning. That's our yellow bag that we now call Original, because technically they're all-purpose. I mean, you can use any of the seasonings and you can use them for anything. That's the beauty that I did not know when I was creating Pluck, how versatile it is, that it goes really well with everything. So Pluck itself is a mix of liver from a cow, so 100% grass-fed liver, heart, kidney, spleen, and pancreas, so 5 organs, which you'll typically find in those ancestral supplements or Heart and Soil. You'll typically see they have an organ blend as well, and it's usually those 5 organs. We're hopefully going to be adding lung to ours down the road, and maybe some other. My goal is to try to add as many as I can to support people needing whole animal. But then what I did was I took those 5 organs and I made it so that we're eating them versus swallowing them. I added Redmond salt to it. I added organic spices and herbs, and I made them actually taste good. And the beautiful thing about Pluck that I did not know when I created it is that the umami, so umami is our 5th unique taste. So we have salty, sweet, bitter, and sour. And then umami was discovered in the 90s in Japan. And they actually think that there is a 6th one, which is when I don't know if they have a word for it yet, but it's basically when something is rancid or foul, that is its own taste as well. So that's the newest one that they're discovering. But basically, they're all unique, right? So if I give you umami, it actually not only does it stand out because it's unique, but it actually brightens the other tastes. So what we learned later on is from feedback is that people will just only add Pluck to the recipe that they make every other week. You know, it's a common household recipe. The only difference was they used Pluck in it. And that night, the people eating were like, they wanted seconds. They were like, "What did you do? This is so good." And so now we've learned that it actually makes the food you're adding it to taste better. And that's the umami in the organ meats.
So we've got pure and original.
Pure, original, and we have one called zesty garlic, which is also AIP, meaning autoimmune protocol, meaning there's no nightshades or seeds. And then we have a spicy mild that is a version of the original or the all-purpose. It's a version of it, but it's just slightly different amounts, and then it has cayenne. And we will eventually come out with a very spicy blend. But as we talked about already, I wanted Pluck to not have any hurdles. And so that's why even when we're adding a spicy blend, we kept it mild, because I want this to be something that you can give to your whole family, that there's no one that's going to have issue necessarily. So we were really trying to find a nice balance. The three flavors, so the original, zesty garlic, and spicy mild, those ones all have the same amount of organ meats. So it's 17%. I'm hoping to get to 20%, but once again, it's a gateway. And so I've found that if I go too high and you can taste it, then it's no longer a gateway. Now we have a hurdle.
It falls up. Yeah.
So I'm constantly trying to mess with it to see if I can go higher. But my hope is I can get to 20%. Now, when people go like, but that doesn't sound like a lot, I'm like, well, okay, hold on. So here's the thing. First of all, you're already using seasoning, and most seasonings have sugar in them. They're mostly salt. So they're salted seasonings versus ours is a seasoning with salt. Salt is like the fourth ingredient, not the first. The other thing is that sometimes the seasoning you're using is actually taking away from the health of the food because of what's in it. So right away, just by switching the seasoning, you're getting something you were not. Then let's talk about, well, how much are you getting? Well, as I mentioned earlier, if you have 2 ounces, if I take an organ meat at 100% and I freeze dry that organ meat, I'm left with like 20%. That's how much you lose in water weight. So when we say 20% of these 5 organs freeze dried, that's a lot of organ meats that have been freeze dried and powdered. It's not just 20%, it's concentrated 20%. So you are definitely getting something you were not. But if you're like, hey, I know I've been tested, I know that I'm low in whatever vitamin or mineral it is, then you could technically buy one of the flavors. And you could buy the black bag, which is pure, and that's just 100% organ meat. There's no salt, there's no seasonings, right? And then you could add more of the pure to the blend to increase the amounts and see if your taste buds work with that. Like you can kind of mess around and create your own Pluck if you want. You can even take pure and add it to your favorite seasonings. We have a lot of carnivore eaters that are using pure, because if you're strict carnivore, you really aren't using seasonings. But what they'll do is they'll take pure and they'll mix it with smoked salt. And they'll just use those two things and they'll sprinkle it on their food. And I've heard that it's delicious, and it sounds delicious, to be honest with you. I mean, fortunately, the way I've designed pure is it's not too strong. So it's a proprietary blend, and I did blend it based on flavor. So if you were just to open capsules and just pour it on your food, those will be very strong because they didn't formulate it for taste. They just are putting equal amounts of the things in there, and that's, they're just trusting you're going to swallow it. But with ours, the pure is actually fairly neutral. It doesn't have a strong taste. I mean, if you can taste a little bit of a meatiness, but it's not like intense, like where you're just going to, like throw it up or something like that because you're just like so shocked. So that is the beauty of pure, is that it's just more balanced than, let's say, a capsule.
Okay, so we've got original, we've got zesty garlic, spicy mild. I ordered a bag of zesty garlic and a bag of spicy mild, so I'm looking forward to getting those. And you were, like I was going to ask, if you wanted to try and increase, we'll call it your tolerance, your taste is probably a more generous word, your taste for the organ meats, then just get a bag of pure and add more of that to any whatever it is you're going to eat. That's all makes sense, right?
And yeah, absolutely. And as you already brought up, it's a gateway, right? So if you are someone who's like, look, I would prefer just to be eating the organs and cooking them myself, then great. Pluck is a great way to start to condition your palate, to recalibrate your palate to enjoy those foods. And we hear that all the time from practitioners that recommend Pluck to their clients. A lot of times it might be a kid who's a little spectrum or a little just flavors are off, textures are off for them. And they'll just recommend just start using Pluck in their food. The kids typically like it. And then the longer they use it and get that umami and it helps to start to change the palate, they actually start asking for more foods, for new foods, so they get more adventurous. So it's absolutely, it doesn't have to be the end result. You can just use it as the starting point and then move on to actually making your own organs, which we highly support. We have tons of recipes on our website. I'm not here just to sell a product. I'm trying to support eating whole animal. And I've even done videos with homesteaders showing people how to make their own Pluck. If you're a homesteader and you have organ meats, I've shared with people how to do it and the ratios. So we're really trying to put forth the mission of let's get these nutrients into our body from these whole food sources. And but if you're just tired and not wanting to do it and not wanting to eat, this will work. It's a lifestyle, and it's easy and it's delicious. And so hopefully, because it hits both of those, you don't have to stop, no matter what is going on in your life, you can just keep going because it's easy. It's delicious. It's not a big deal. You're just seasoning your food. I mean, we even put it on, if we eat out like pizza, something like that, we sprinkle it on pizza. It's something that you can literally put on almost anything.
And I'm so looking forward to getting my spicy and zesty garlic bags. I'm pretty excited about that because I held off on cooking my own food and being very kind of diligent about how much protein I was eating, but I really wanted to make a change. And for me, just to share with the audience, just drastically increasing my protein consumption, staying with this exact same workout routine. I've put on muscle mass, and I'm 55. This is the age where you're not supposed to be putting on muscle mass. Well, you should be putting on muscle mass.
Yeah,
but
you need
classically, you're dropping muscle, and heading in the direction of sarcopenia. And so, I've gotten very diligent about cooking my, I like to rotate the protein. So it's lean turkey, it's the ancestral bison, the ancestral cow, and shrimp. So I'll rotate those throughout weeks, months, whatever that looks like. But spices are something that really make one meal different than the other. And I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I did a carnivore. I tend to do a lot of different trends or recipe or diets. I'll test myself on them just so I can understand how to cook for them, talk about them. And I did carnivore for 30 days, and that was one piece that I got bored. Because if you're strict carnivore, you're just doing salt and meat, and I am someone who likes flavor. I think we can talk about fuel versus, food is fuel, but I think how I tend to look at it is we're only on this planet for a very short time. And while I want to be healthy and to the point of this podcast, and I want to live a long life, I also want to enjoy my time. And I think we think that enjoyment has to be, well, that means I'm eating tons of sugar and crap. It's no, that doesn't, that's just how you're defining that. But for me, it's flavor. I like to have flavor. And if I have flavor, I will stick to a very strict diet. It just needs to be flavorful and varied for me.
That makes perfect sense. All right, so we're at time. I figured this would go a little bit long. I've got some wrap-up questions, so if we can do these in kind of a rapid-fire way. Chef James, do you have a target age that you want to live to?
Right now it's at the high 90s to early 102s, and I think it's mostly because it's hard for me to imagine being able to live longer, and I know we're talking more and more in this biohacking realms of getting to 120 to 140, things like that. I just haven't seen anyone do it yet, so it's hard for me to imagine it. But if I can live into even my late 90s, I'll get to see my daughters potentially have kids of their own, and that's a huge win. Yeah,
that's awesome. All right, how long do you think humans can live?
Well, it's ever changing, but definitely, what I think we've seen 114, isn't that the
122 is a Jean Clement, a French lady.
Well, there you go.
So cigarettes. until her eyesight was so bad she couldn't light her cigarette. That's why she quit.
which is a whole other topic of like, well, these people that are living so long, it's not because of a restricted diet. Have you noticed that?
Exactly.
I think that's
so
very
we'll
important.
talk that up in the 120s or so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets? Let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts for longevity and a long health span that you can share.
Well, sleep, definitely. I think we underestimate how important sleep is. And that's one of the things that has thrown off my health, because we mentioned earlier, I didn't take vacations very long, and I kind of worked very hard and very long and didn't sleep at all, like 3-4 hours a night. And I suffered because of it severely. Hormonally, I suffered. Mental capabilities, I suffered. So I would put sleep at the top. And the other I would say is food choices. I mean, as a chef, it's really important to me what foods we're choosing. And as I mentioned earlier, that we're actually eating the food. And along with both of those, and I think they all serve each other, but I actually would put our state, the state that we're living in, and also doing these things in. So the state of eating, what is the state you're in when you're eating? We don't talk as much about that. And I really do believe that just like placebo effect exists, it's a real thing. Well, the fact that placebo effect exists and is a legit part of human nature, that also tells you how powerful your state of mind is. And like, if you believe it, it's possible that your body will too. You know what I mean? So that basically, like when I'm eating, I'm trying to be in a blissful state versus like I don't want to be thinking about, oh, this is conventional meat, and oh, what did that animal, like I don't want to be in a negative state, like, but I want to be really focusing on being joyful and happy when I'm eating this food. And that's why flavor is so important to me. Like creating conditions or an environment that are conducive towards that joy is so important to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there, from your perspective, right, you've got the culinary and kind of nutrition, what are 1 to 2 things that people are absolutely getting wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
Well, I think we're seeing this a lot, particularly in America, but that all or nothing mentality, I think, is just we're disregarding our human nature. So what's happening for the most part is people lob on to something and they go so hard with it that they then burn out a month or 2 later. So there's no consistency. And as I said earlier, I believe the things that move the needle the most are the things that we do daily. And not just for a month, but for our lifetime. So I'm always more interested in the thing that you can do daily versus that thing that you're going to go hardcore with for a month and then drop off. To me, that's just snake oil. It's a waste of money. And we all have it. You go to a garage sale and what's for sale? It's like all those exercise trends, from the Thigh Master to the pull-up bar, that goes in your doorway. It's like, it's just constant, these kind of things that we think we're going to do, but we don't. So I think that we're disregarding our emotional intelligence around what it means to be human. And that's probably the biggest one. I wish we could just kind of take ownership of, like, you know what? I'm mostly consistent with my inconsistency than my consistency. So what's the thing I can do today that's going to serve, that's going to be the easiest gain, the easiest way for me to kind of master the thing that I'm working towards, but I'm not going to try to go too high. I'm just going to try to do a basic level or first step around it. And I'm going to get that down and make sure I'm doing that daily until I move on to the next step.
Yeah, I often talk about, like, if it pains you to think about training or working out or doing movement, if it's just a walk for more than 5 minutes, don't think about it. Just do 5 minutes a day. Hopefully, eventually, you'll get to doing more. But if even thinking about that causes you not to do it, then you're doing yourself a disservice. All right, Chef James. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and attach it to something that you're doing daily. Like, so I always tell people, like, look, if walking is all you can do, then make sure you're choosing to walk after every meal you eat. Because then now it's a habit. It's like, because you're going to eat, and then you just attach that walking right to it. So now those two things happen naturally versus something you have to obsess around and feel like a failure at if you don't do it.
That makes great sense. All right, Chef James, how can people contact you?
So you can find Pluck at eatpluck.com. You could find us on socials at eatpluck, pretty much all of them. And then I'm Chef James Berry on Instagram and Facebook as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we have tons of recipes on our site. It's a really great resource. Working on another cookbook, which I hope to have out at the end of the year. And I'm also starting a podcast. It's called Everyday Ancestral. So we're really going to try to be supporting people in taking these ancestral concepts and moving them into their daily life.
Awesome. I will be sure to subscribe to that. What in the near future are you excited about?
Well, I think I'm most excited about, we're going to be working on shakers. So right now, Pluck comes in a bag and we're going to have shakers. So I'm really excited about that because one of the questions we inevitably get is when someone sees the bag is our brains aren't wired yet to look at a bag and think of seasoning. We tend to think of like beef jerky or like nuts or seeds or something like that. And so my hope is that once we're using shakers, we'll no longer have the question of, well, what is it? We'll then now get the question, what's in it? Like what is the seasoning? And so that excites me a lot. And then we have a few different products come out. We're going to have these travel boxes coming out. So they'll have single-use packets that people can take when they travel. Those will be debuting very soon. And then we'll just have a way for people to sample it. We're going to have a whole sample pack where you get a single serve pack of each SKU. So I'm just excited about that. We're making it easier for people to try and realize, how good it is versus just wondering, since it's
what
the
is
first.
It?
Yeah, what is this and how is it going to take? Because that was interesting because we launched during COVID and it was like, we are the first of our kind. No one had mixed those two ingredients together, the seasonings and the organ meats. So no one knew how it tasted, and yet we were launching at a time when I couldn't get samples to people
in front
because
of people, yeah,
there was no venues.
Very interesting. All right, so you can find Chef James at eatpluck.com. Eatpluck on the social medias. There's recipes at Eatpluck. There's the products at Eatpluck. I found your website very easy to navigate, so that was very nice. And you can find him, Chef James Berry, across social media. I think you may have a website. If not, you can at least Google Chef James Berry, and you'll come up with him and hopefully this interview. Chef James, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.